Good day, everyone. Hello, I see people coming in. So I think we will start soon. Oh, I know there's some more people signed up, but they'll come in. Okay, so good day. Welcome to the webinar, Caring During the Pandemic, Experiences of Community Museums and Cultural Centers. My name is Deniz Ünsal, and I am an assistant professor at the School of Communication and Culture at Royal Roads University. And Royal Roads is located on the traditional lands of the Xwepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. It is with gratitude that we now learn and work here, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. I am an immigrant here since 2015. I was born and raised in Turkey and traveled for learning and work before embarking on my journey here on the Turtle Island. And we have today 3 speakers from different community museums and cultural centers from BC. Juanita Johnson, Executive Director of Umista Cultural Center in Alert Bay. Karah Goshinmon Foster, Executive Director of Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center in Burnaby, and Nicole Stanbridge, Curator of Engagement and Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. I'll invite them to introduce themselves and their organizations briefly in a moment. But before that, a few tips about today. So we'll have a roundtable for about an hour. You can type your questions in the chat. And my dear colleague, Emara Angus, will be monitoring them, and we'll get back to the questions at the end. Okay, now I'd like to give a context to our roundtable today, what brought us here. When the pandemic hit, one of the first public spaces to shut down were community cultural organizations such as museums, cultural centers, and art galleries. These organizations safeguard community stories and resources, represent their community's history and memory, and promote and share this heritage and creativity with next generations, as well as with the wider society. Some are founded by the community. This kinship, you might call, is woven through their everyday work with the community. So what happens when their doors are shut, their activities are put on hold? How do they approach, reconsider, and engage their work with the communities? How do they stay relevant and supportive to their communities? This was a question I wanted to have conversations on with a series of community museums and cultural organizations. So in the past year, I have been meeting several cultural workers from community organizations in BC and also visited most of their spaces. I would like to thank here to all of them for making time to meet me, for sharing their experiences and insights with me, as I know they were working under difficult conditions. And for sure, the pandemic challenged all societies with the crisis in care. We see the entrenched capacity of healthcare facilities. Individually, many people suffered from social isolation, mental health, economic difficulties, and inability to access significant services and goods. And as the pandemic disrupts the normalcy of life, it exacerbates existing inequities too. Some communities are impacted by the social and economic challenges caused by the pandemic more than others, and in different ways. And statistics show that individuals from Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities are hit harder. Job losses, mental health issues are one part of these challenges, but the other part is the increase in everyday experience of prejudice and discrimination. And many institutions have been taking measures to navigate in this health and social crisis by adopting better working conditions, work ethic, and strategies for inclusion and diversity in their institutions. The experience of community museums and cultural centers is particularly noteworthy, as culture and community are at the core of their work and identity. Their experience shows that as community organizations, they had to revisit, expand, and diversify their roles, try new approaches to engagement with their communities. They adopted different strategies, put regular work timelines on hold, and responded to needs of the community. So today we will explore together in this crisis of care how cultural centers and community museums care about their communities and their needs. And what does this care include? How does it manifest itself? Can we argue that there's now a new awareness, a new way of working, a new conversation, or a new ethics? And how does this new awareness look like in the community engagement planning and practices of these organizations? Okay, so before diving into these questions, let's do a first round to introduce our guests today. So I'd like to start with Juanita. Could you introduce yourself, what your organization does, and also describe us who your community or communities are?
Yes. Gaelicasla, Nuba am Talisalas, Gayatlan Haida Lu Kwakwakiwak. Thank you, Deniz. My second nation's name is Juanita. I am Haida and Kwakwakiwak. I live, work, and play in the traditional territory of the Namgis First Nation and other Kwakwakiwak nations as well. My pronouns are she and her. I'd like to thank Deniz for organizing this, and Nicole and Karah, as well as Royal Roads. I'm excited to hear everyone's perspective on this. For those who don't know, the Amistad Cultural Center houses a collection of repatriated materials. We've been in existence since November 1st, 1980 was when we opened. The Cultural Center has about 4 galleries for display. Our community is not just Kwakwakiwak and Namgis First Nation members. It also extends to our local community. So we have a treatment center, elders in long-term care next door at the hospital, as well as elder center just across the road. So we consider everyone on the island our community as well. It's a small isolated island, and we also run a lot of programs for youth and elders, and we try to partner with our community organizations as much as possible. And I hope that's everything.
Okay, thank you, Anita. We'll have many rounds of discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karah, how about you? Would you like to go second?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. I guess I'll just start off by thanking everyone for joining us today. And also I'd like to thank Juanita and Nicole for joining in this discussion, and for Deniz for organizing all of this. My name is Karah Goshinmon Foster, and I'm the executive director at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center. Nikkei refers to of Japanese ancestry. And so here at the Nikkei Museum and Cultural Center, it's our mission to honor, preserve, and share the history and heritage of Japanese Canadians and Japanese culture in Canada. And here, our location is also at a place called Nikkei Place. We are located in Burnaby on a 3-acre property, which was purchased by the community. We say that as the funding that was used in order to purchase the property came from the Japanese Canadian Redress Settlement and the Japanese Canadian Redress Foundation, which enabled us to then go back to the community, fundraise, come together, and the founders all fundraised within the community to build the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center facility. And we're a 34,000 square foot facility at Nikkei Place, where we have partner organizations, the Nikkei Place Foundation, which is a fundraising, an endowment fund organization in support of both us and the Nikkei Seniors Healthcare and Housing Society, for which we have an assisted living and independent living complex at Nikkei Place. The focus being, of course, on Japanese Canadian history, heritage preservation. We have a collection and archives a repository that was started by the community, by individuals, by volunteers, dating back into the late 70s and early 80s, when the societies, the forming and origin societies started to take shape. And we opened here in the year 2000. We just passed our 22nd anniversary yesterday on September 22nd, and just looking forward to more discussion with everyone.
Thank you, Karah. It was a beautiful place. I've been to your Nikkei place last spring, as to Mr. Cultural Center. Beautiful. Okay, now someone close to home here, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I am also looking forward to this. We've just been doing a lot and not having a lot of time to actually talk through this. So I'm looking forward to this and to chatting more with Juanita and Karah as well. We just actually got to work with the Nikkei Museum recently for a show that just opened here. So great to chat with you, Karah. So my name is Nicole Stanbridge. I'm the Curator of Engagement at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. So we're located on the Plungan territory as well. And our responsibility to that community and to the lands here is at the forefront of the work that we're doing. We serve a broad community here. We are the largest visual art gallery in Victoria, and as such, you know, we have a lot of different communities and folks that are a priority to us to serve, and the local arts community, of course, is one, but we collaborate with, you know, other institutions, artisan centers, universities and schools, and different cultural groups. So it's a broad mandate that we have. We're also a collecting institution, so we have an expansive collection. Our largest collection is the Asian art collection. And the gallery is housed partly, I'm currently in my office, which is in a historic building that was donated by the Spencer family. And then we have this modern addition that houses our exhibition spaces. So it's an interesting hybrid of a building that we have. My role here at the gallery is also a bit of a hybrid. I kind of straddle the curatorial and education roles. And that shift in my role happened back in late 2014. And it's a role I really enjoy. So I work on exhibitions and public programs and community engagement and building relationships. And I oversee the engagement team. So we have a studio program and several other engagement facilitators that serve programs for all ages in a lot of different ways in the gallery and outside of the institution. So yeah, I'm excited to chat more with you all about how we've been handling things.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for these introductions. So let's focus on your community engagement experiences during the pandemic now. During our earlier conversations, you mentioned that when the pandemic hit, you stopped, not just stopped working, but stopped doing things the way you used to. Your attention shifted to different concerns, and you noticed you needed to take care of those first. What did you notice? Why did you shift your attention to different directions? And how did the pandemic impact your work with the communities? Who would like to go first? Nicole, go ahead.
Sure, I can go first. Well, it was interesting. We didn't really stop. We did close our doors. It was interesting. I think we were all kind of like, you know, the months after everything shut down, we were scrambling to figure out how to shift gears. And we were in an interesting situation because we had been working for several years on a building project, and we were trying to figure out whether our building would be closed for renovations and things. So we were already kind of in a mode where we were prepared to shift gears, and we were thinking about alternative ways to engage people. Most of that was kind of going into the community, but all of a sudden now we had to shift gears and figure out how to engage people online. And so that was a big shift. So we did physically close the gallery, but we kept kind of going to readjust, recalibrate how we were working. And then we were able to reopen our doors in June that year. So it was quite soon after, with a lot of protocols in place. But one of the things that kind of drove that decision was that our space is also one that provides well-being for the community. And in a time like the pandemic, it was really important that people had a space they could go to that, you know, took their minds in other directions and felt like a safe space that was outside of their home that they could engage in. And we engaged in a lot of different initiatives to shift gears and try out, you know, with this new circumstance, try out ways of reaching people. So one of the first things that happened was a collaboration with art institutions across Canada, and it was a website called Field Trip Art Across Canada. And that was really spearheaded by the Calgary Art Gallery. And what we did there was we had an online platform where we could share online programs, and we would help promote each other's programs. And so we came up with a strategy to have a programming calendar, and we were working with folks that we were familiar with, who we could, you know, content we had in the works, or folks that we were working with, to build different experiences online. So that was one of the things we did. And with a lot of our different initiatives, like our studio program and Family Sunday, we found ways to do that online and provide physical program, the kits that we could either drop off to people or they could come pick up. So there was a way to feel connected and be working from the same place. And the studio program went through tons of fluctuations of calibrating over the, you know, 2 or so year span of, you know, doing small bubbles with in-person programs, keeping things online. So we were constantly calibrating that. Another thing we did was because a huge, you know, our reason for being is to support artists. So another initiative that took place was an acquisition project to highlight, to look at a selection of artists to purchase work from, as a way to keep paying artists in the community. And yeah, and so, you know, those were some of the key things. One of the programs that started to take shape in 2020 and was delivered in 2021 was the Indigenous Intergenerational Exchange that was led by Marianne Nicholson, Marika Swan, and Nikki Sanchez. And that had to take a big shift, because we, the impetus for that was to really support the youth who had been on the front lines of the actions at the ledge around the Wet'suwet'en actions that took place that time in early 2020. And that Marianne was really wanting to support those youth and find a way to connect with them and create a space where there could be conversation and a way to process what had happened earlier in the year. And so we spent months just in conversation, figuring out what we would be offering and how to create a space in these conditions. And so what we ended up doing was we had an online group. There was 15 people and would meet every 2 weeks from February through to end of March. And this culminated to a physical exhibition presentation at the gallery in June of 2021. And, you know, I think that, you know, the feedback back we've had, we have a podcast on our website that is a conversation with all of those facilitators, talking through what that meant. So that's a really great kind of debrief of what happened with that project. But it was, it had such an impact on me, just seeing how much we could make an uncomfortable virtual space be truly a space for caring that people really counted on. And we made sure that we had supports in that process. We had an elder we could call on for support. We had a counselor that people could book sessions with if they felt they needed that. And, you know, we were all available to the folks who were part of that group. And similar to the Family Sunday, we had care packages that were sent out to everyone in their home communities or wherever they were. They weren't all necessarily in Victoria, so that we all had some things that we were starting from. And supplies that we could do activities together with and just talk through. But yeah, it was a very collaborative process with everyone involved. And I think that program left the biggest impression on me about how the different ways that we can care for each other. Because when we weren't able to be in person, that felt like such a, that's how we've been working, you know, we were gathering, eating food together, being in space together. You know, the things we were wanting to work through required that intimacy. And how do you recreate that in these boxes, these weird spaces? So yeah, does that, those are some highlights. I don't want to go on too long, but that kind of covers what you were.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole. No, you really point to that, the richness of being in the proximity of people, right? And there's so much exchange happening there. Even when you're quiet, there's a lot going on. Yeah, thank you. Okay, who'd like to go next? You, Anita, go ahead.
Yeah, we closed down as well for 11 weeks, but we did not stop working. We had a bit of a deficit when we closed, so that was our first focus. Our board had given us very clear directions moving forward that they wanted to incorporate more language programming and language resource creation. So we kind of had a bit of a game plan, and then we had a bit of staff restructuring, and staff had left. So we went from 5 full-time to 2, so that as soon as we opened up, we had spent those 11 weeks writing grants, basically. And anyone who even thought of giving us money, we hit them up again. So we managed to close the gap with cost cutting and writing additional grants, so that we were in a really good position when we opened to rehire new staff and move forward with the directions from the board. But because we had the pandemic in town quite early on and had lost an elder, people were very conscious about in-person programs. So we canceled all of the in-person programming for that summer of 2020. We did look at some virtual programs and openings. We also became part of this working group of 8 local community organizations because of the mental health crisis that was going on, especially our youth and elders feeling quite isolated. And it was through working with this group, we came up with a program that focused on that transition of knowledge and getting youth and elders out into nature. And we also had to pivot that program because we couldn't do as much in person. And then we realized as well that while Zoom is great, it's quite heavy on data, and teenagers are not gonna waste their data on a Zoom program. So we had to think about ways, okay, well, let's give them free Wi-Fi so that we can do this. So we just found that we were constantly pivoting. And one of the things that became very clear early on was that we spend around $150,000 a year in community buying art and paying honorariums to elders, and that this was going to negatively impact our community quite quickly. So we created a resilience exhibit, and we purchased art right from the artists, and we we paid the elders honorariums to do phone interviews, talk about resilience and what it meant to them, and created a couple of ramp case exhibits out of that. So we just were constantly learning to pivot. We did do some hybrid openings that were a mix of inviting a cohort or a bubble of elders to come in, and then everyone else was virtual. And a bonus of that was we had more people at that opening than we have ever housed or had in person. And I don't know if it was just because people were jonesing for culture as well. Not being able to gather was really hard on our community, and not being able to access the big house was something that we really felt. So those are just some of the ways that we kind of had workarounds. And the next summer we kind of incorporated programming if we could do it outside or we could do it socially distanced. So things did change quite a bit, but this past summer we've kind of gone back to the old way. Zoom is great unless you're in a remote community, and then your internet connection can sometimes not be the greatest.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, very you know, when we spoke earlier as well, you mentioned all these you know, different choices you made and how you supported the youth, the elders, the artists. Yeah, very impressive actually, all that time, so difficult. Okay, thank you. How about you, Karah?
All very interesting, and I'm hearing some parallels and
Mhm.
differences too. Here we did close right away in March of 2020, but we did also reopen in June of 2020, and of course, like others, didn't stop working either. We kept working all the way through, and preparing for reopening as well. But reopening didn't mean that everyone was still coming back, of course. So it meant that we were open. Our facility itself was open. We had very limited programming depending on what it was that was possible. Something we did see and something we wanted to be able to offer was still the rental of our facility to the Canadian Blood Services. And so we were still able to be a location, which we regularly are, and even today they're here on site. And so we found that there were still certain organizations or community groups that really did need a physical space. We also pivoted highly into an online format. It was an area we hadn't really explored very much in the past as far as online programming, but we did have to do a lot of quick switches and changes to try to get at least our communications out, reaching out more broadly and communicating with a wider audience online, kind of reaching across Canada, whereas really mostly we are a gathering physical place. And so we have a responsibility in our name and in our mission to reach nationwide. But that in previous years with the location, the physical location has of course taken a priority. So that was an interesting shift in thinking about how we could use this opportunity to reach a little bit further beyond our physical building. We really looked at and became aware of how much our organization is supported by volunteerism and the importance of our volunteers within our organization. Particularly for us, as I kind of alluded to, we sort of grew out of community initiatives, individuals, Japanese Canadians who felt that there was a need to document the history of Japanese Canadians when they weren't seeing it happening. And so took it upon themselves to just start. And they started and worked towards the goal of being able to open a museum and cultural center. And when we opened here, that focus on being a physical gathering place, a place where community could come, return to on the West Coast, was very significant. Particularly given the forced dispersal of Japanese Canadians from the West Coast. And so this was not only a physical place, but a symbolic return, a physical plant here on the West Coast of Canada. And we were meant to be a gathering place for Japanese Canadians, but also for the broader community. And that was for everyone. And so we also could see that there was an increase, notably in the number of local Burnaby visitors walking through our garden. people were going for walks, and there were a few of us on site, but we were seeing still this consistency of local residents coming through our open garden. And we're very lucky to have a beautiful Japanese Canadian garden in our setting. And so we saw that as another opportunity. How can we activate? We're lucky to have this garden. We have an outdoor space, and how can we better activate the outdoor spaces, we had really been focusing indoors, a lot of indoor programming. We have programming rooms, spaces, multi-purpose rooms, activities happening in the indoors, and a budojo, martial arts space, a tea room, tatami room space. But the garden hadn't really been fully activated, I think, to its full potential. And so in the summer of 2020, we had 3 outdoor markets, and it was a small summer at Nikkei garden, 3 little outdoor markets, really just to offer a place to come and engage. And we had families interacting in the garden, games for kids, and we took the inspiration from our annual Nikkei Matsuri Family Festival. It's a celebration of Japanese culture here locally. It's a big celebration, so we knew we weren't going to be able to do that. There certainly was no way we could have 10,000 people coming through our center, but we wanted to do something. We could see that there were from children to elders still needing a physical place to come, and so being an open a space which does have some high ceilings and some open areas lent itself well to having a bit of distance and space throughout. But what we saw with the Summer at Nikkei Garden markets was this opportunity to activate the space and still engage volunteers who, many really wanted to have a place to come and still give back, to share and give back to the community themselves as volunteers. And so in 2021, the summer, we started the Nikkei Garden Farmers Market. We worked with the BC Farmers Market Association and started to host 2 markets a month in between June and October as a way to bring people back in the outdoor space. We had all different levels of protocol depending on what they were all throughout the summer and as they changed every time. But we saw a gradual return of people to the center, enjoying the garden spaces, and also being able to provide local access to food and Japanese food, local vegetables, berry farmers, from Japanese to non-Japanese foods and crafts and arts. And so we started to bring back vendors as we could. And the hope is that we can be able to host a weekly summer market every summer, and then be able to consistently open on Sundays, which is also a day that we have traditionally been closed. And so we want to be able to start to expand those days that we're open to reach more people in that way.
Yeah, and I remember, Karah, you mentioned as well that people, when they came for the farmers market, they also went in the building, and now you had new people who maybe have never been in your building before, reading the panels, yes, learning about the past.
That's exactly right. We saw completely new demographics coming through and visiting the Japanese Canadian heritage photograph exhibit and our gallery, which it's interesting, our gallery had just completed renovations in 2019. And so we were really getting ready to finally start to host new exhibitions and bring people into a new gallery space. And so that, of course, really changed in 2020, but we saw that this new audience started to come through in 2021.
Yeah, interesting. It's amazing how skilled organizations become in adapting to the uncertainty, right? Now this measure, now that measure. So Yeah. So, okay, you explained the impact of the pandemic on your work with the communities, and the different kinds of options you chose, the physical space, establishing Zoom connections, maybe not always meeting the needs, but when physical social distancing is in order and not possible to come together, digital platforms offer some kind of an option. You took care of your staff, different groups in your communities, elders, the youth, the artists you work with. Do you think now there is a new awareness, a new way of working? Maybe are you having a new conversation in your organizations? Do you think there is a new ethics in working in community museums, in cultural organizations? Working with communities, but also maybe like the way you do exhibitions, fundraising, or curatorial practices, HR work. Is there a new something, a new awareness, an accentuated, a new approach? Do you sense that kind of shift in your work? Whoever would like to go first.
I can just sort of start,
yeah.
and my mind goes to what we saw is really a heightened sense of value within the place and the space, and that came from across the staff, the volunteers, community members, and stakeholders. We started to see that they cared about what was happening at Nikkei Center as well. And it was a place that was a part of a lot of people's lives. And it was an important place, whether physically or whether we were reaching out kind of online. And something that we have started to really take on and endeavor to embody was this, the Japanese principle of omotenashi. Omotenashi being a caring, it's a difficult translation, but it's a caring and taking care of your guests to the fullest extent. And so some might say it's a hospitality or kind of welcoming environment. But this runs through that, the traditions, and sort of leaning into some of the traditions that still provide us with roots and ground us, while these new conversations and change is happening rapidly and all around us. And so really trying to dig into that tradition of omotenashi for our guests, for everyone, to take care of each other, in a meaningful, authentic and honest way. Because there are a lot of changes and a lot of things going on that, with the frequency and the rapid changing of the environment with which for which the staff were working in, it caused this kind of uncertainty that we needed to have some kind of grounding or stability. And so that was sort of one approach anyways to being able to navigate all of these potential changes. And I think we're still going through all of this right now, and we kind of are riding it up, down, and all around.
Yeah, I really like that, the caring for the guests and for ourselves. Okay, how about you, Juanita?
Yeah, exactly what Karah said. We started to be more aware that what we've been doing previously, we were neglecting kind of a whole segment of the health and wellness aspect of the culture. And so that just included not just our community, but our staff as well. And to make sure everyone took breaks, and for those, working from home, at least try and get some type of social happenings. They're not so isolated. When we onboarded new staff, we started buying everyone a yoga mat in case they wanted to take a yoga break instead of a coffee break. And then we started thinking about our policies, and that sick days should include mental health. Currently, they don't. They're very narrow, a very narrow definition of what a sick day is. And if people were testing positive for COVID, I'm like, don't go to the doctor. You don't need a note. Just text me a photo of your test. That's good enough. We don't need to follow this rigid policy and just stay home and isolate. So we were really good at pivoting and starting to think about all aspects of people's health and wellness, and bringing that to, not just to our staff, our little staff, but also to the community as a whole. We did do a lot of Zoom classes with elders teaching Kwakwala in their little bubble. And then they wanted to do Christmas carols on Zoom, and they started that themselves. So it was really great to see them kind of taking it and running with it. And they just wanted to sort of uplift everyone at Christmas. And so they had a little Christmas concert where they sang in Kwakwala. And yeah, it was really sweet. And then they had cooking classes in Kwakwala. So they really branched out and ran with the Zoom as long as we sent them a technical person. So
how about the place? Did the place have a similar kind of meaning also for the community you're serving, Juanita?
Yeah,
access to the place?
Yeah. Once we opened back up, we actually noticed that our visitors were really local to the North Island of Vancouver. People who'd not gone north of Campbell River were the bulk of our visitors that summer. And a lot of people that would come home, and because they weren't coming home for a potlatch, would take the time to come into the center as well. So we had a lot of and Kwakwaka'wakw visitors as well that hadn't been here in years. Oh, we didn't know you changed exhibits. Yeah, imagine that. So it was really nice to sort of see those people come home and take the time to come and visit, and they were really grateful that they could come back in. I think also closing for 11 weeks kind of, made people realize how much they missed the space.
Yeah.
itself. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Juanita.
You're welcome.
How about the gallery, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I really like what Karah and Juanita were saying too about how that shift of, making sure people were okay and taking the time to, I think we were all guilty of just like working through being sick before the pandemic. You'd be coming into work kind of on your last legs, kind of dragging yourself in and keeping going. And it was really like, yeah, if you're sick, stay home. And we're still, we were working from home, and we had a very lean crew on site here to keep when we reopened. But I feel like the thing that is still continuing is this hybrid model. We still have people working from home, in the office, but for mental well-being, I think people wanted to be back in the space together. I know that some people have been very vocal about how like they need to be in the office for their well-being, like they want to be connecting with their colleagues. And within our department, we work very collaboratively. So the nature of how we worked got really disrupted by, I feel like everything online has to be so intentional. Like you have to where you don't just pass someone in their office or in the hallway and have a quick chat. Everything felt so intentional, and it's hard to just look out for each other when it's like that. You don't know what's happening for somebody at home if they're not everyone feels comfortable reaching out saying like, I'm not okay right now, and you can see that when you're in space together better than in your home. So that hybrid model has definitely continued. And the other thing that really came up for us was, the idea, the work around accessibility, which is a massive topic and, is defined in so many different ways. We're not just going back to everything in person. We're still keeping a certain amount, like we are today, like there's a few things we're keeping in a virtual space, and it allows for people to come together without traveling and be in a conversation together. And, you know, we did things like we got a grant from the Canada Council that allowed us to launch a podcast series. And with that series, we were able to do ASL video interpretations of the videos to have on YouTube. So it kind of pushed us to see what we could do in virtual space, and led us to actually do an digital accessibility audit with Tangled Arts out of Toronto. And so that's giving us some tools to figure out, you know, not everyone is comfortable being in person, although I don't know about, you know, the other spaces, but like people really want to be back in person. So we're doing a lot of in-person programming, but we still have a good range of online programs that we're offering, because not everyone wants to be in physical space, and there's still that interest in being able to engage and have conversations and feel connected through online programming. So I think that has been the biggest shift. We had social media before, but now we're using it in a way, it's such a bigger way to reach people. But I guess the question now, and you know, this is something would be kind of good to hear more from our communities about how they're accessing their content, like what interests them still. Are Zoom programs still interesting? Like we said, we moved to doing podcasts and using our Instagram in different ways, making shorter like video trailers with content to reach people, because we found they didn't necessarily want long programs. They want maybe more, you know, we're just inundated with so much content. So that's the other thing I think we're trying to figure out too, is how do people want to access their content and their experiences right now? In person is definitely of interest. That's been getting a lot of success. But online, how do people want to be accessing engagement?
And that is, of course, technology develops so far, it's hard sometimes to catch up. And then the way, organizations are integrating these technologies in, do you have staff who master these technologies? You know, how much they cost? How do you maintain it? I mean, it brings a whole discussion, I guess, about, how digital technologies are going to be purchased or maintained in the organization. Those are good questions. I just want to ask a last question, and then maybe open the space for you three to, if you have questions to each other before turning to the audience, which is kind of following the same line. We know that the pandemic caused a crisis in healthcare, but it also kind of exacerbated the social justice issues, the inequities. We saw a rise of hate speech, anti-Asian, racism or discrimination and prejudice toward racialized communities. And in how much of this was part of your work during the pandemic to support your communities? Because some of your communities might have been impacted by these developments, and you were not able to address maybe in your spaces this directly. And Zoom, as you say, has this limited access. What did you do? How did you support your communities? Who would like to go first? Karah?
I can jump in. I just kind of thinking here on one sort of aspect that I thought of just as you were also speaking was the kind of expectation of the community to also be able to access things now that we're in person completely and now are hybrid, and this sort of expectation of both in person and hybrid kind of continuing. And in some ways, we've found that our roots come from a number of different organizations and initiatives that came out of the recognition of the forced dispersal and internment of Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. And coming out of that, there were a number of different community initiatives, some perhaps more culturally focused or arts focused, focused on academics, or focused on writing and documentation, or also in activism. And so our roots are kind of connected to a number of different Japanese Canadian organizations which support different aspects of our community. And so we're lucky in that we have collaborative organizations, and we can work together with organizations such as the Japanese Canadian Citizens Association, the Greater Vancouver Japanese Canadian Citizens Association, and the National Association of Japanese Canadians. And in particular, locally with the JCCA, they represent interests of the community in a way that allows us to really focus on the museum practice and our cultural center activities and programs. And so while we addressed some of the issues that were at hand, taking place, and very topical and happening in the moment, we were also able to rely on the support of these other organizations to speak out and speak for the community in a way that we didn't have the expertise to do so. And so I think, we've found that collaborating with these different organizations, that we've come back closer together in the work that we're doing, understanding that each of these organizations has a specific role to play, and we can collaborate and work together, but focus our expertise so that we are also not spreading ourselves too thin, maybe to say, because there's a lot of expectations on responses and reactions to these ongoing issues, more than we have currently the capacity to do. And so that's that collaborative process of working together, connecting with either individuals or organizations that could help us at that time and still currently it's been a positive way for us to remain connected at this time.
Yeah, because you're part of a group of different organizations, right? In the community, there are different organizations addressing different issues. So, yeah.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Sometimes, also we know that we are a place where people will maybe initially first come to for information about a wide range of Japanese Canadian community initiatives or ongoing activities.
Yeah.
But there are a number of different Japanese Canadian organizations as well that we are connected with and we work with to meet this very broad community need, and these questions of who is our community really started to come to the forefront.
Yeah. Thank you, Karah. Okay, can I ask you, Juanita? Yeah.
Yes, I think that's really super smart, Karah. What a great way to do it, so you're not spreading your people way too thin. It was challenging enough to go through the pandemic. We started thinking more broadly about our community and being more accessible in as many ways as we could. The center itself has ramps to every gallery, but we didn't have an accessible front door that was automatic. You could open it and prop it open and it would stay, but still not accessible if you're in a wheelchair. So we installed that, and we started thinking about economic accessibility, and it's expensive to get to Alert Bay. So why don't we offer a 2-for-1 ticket entry? A lot of museums were doing family rates. Let's offer that as well. And we also relied heavily on our partnerships. When we were meeting to create the Awilgalo program, the All Being Together program, with the 8 partner organizations, we did a circle check-in before with everyone that was there at the table, just to make sure everyone was doing well, and if there was any concerns or anything they needed. And then when we did an event, we started doing debriefings too, to make sure people felt okay, and really conscious of lateral violence and things like that too, that can get stirred up during a pandemic. And also, you know, people will say things virtually that they wouldn't say to somebody's face. So to always be conscious and aware of that, and always reminding people to be respectful to everyone that's attending, not just, you know, people in authority or whatever. So we did, I think the check-ins, some people felt like they were a bit much, but I think overall it really helped the group, and it helped us to progress to the point where we could apply for the funds and we were successful. And then we continued meeting right up until we hired the new hire, and then they just let us do the work. So it was a really great working group. Once the project wraps up, we've been extended a couple times, so that's good news, because the need is there, obviously. So once it wraps up, we will all come together again as a group, what worked, what didn't, you know, how our partners are all feeling. And I think that is a new way of working that we'll continue forward
With the community partners.
Yeah, as many times as we can partner with them, we do. For Indigenous Day, for example, and Truth and Reconciliation Day at the end of the month. There's the same partners that we did the Awogala program with are all at the table to pull off a successful TRC Day and honor our survivors.
Okay, so you have established new relations, or kind of strengthened your ties with existing organizations.
Absolutely, we've strengthened those local partnerships, which I feel like we're kind of being overlooked. Yeah, and now it's beneficial for everyone. Yeah.
All right, interesting. Thank you, Juanita.
You're welcome.
Nicole, how about you?
Yeah, I have so many things popping into my mind hearing Karah and Anita talking. I'm like, oh, what should I focus on? Yeah, I mean, a few of the things. One thing we did just in terms of thinking about how we're inviting people into the space, we actually changed our hours. So we had Thursday morning, we were closed to the public and people could book private tours. So if they wanted to just come in with their own small group. And even as things have shifted, we've kept that structure. So now we always have Thursday mornings available for a facilitator to meet with if a private group wants to book. And it just gives us that flexibility again for the folks who still, you know, a lot of people are just jumping back into life and like being in person, no masks, is just like we're right back in there. But you know, there's a lot of needs that vary so much, and we need to be thinking about, you know, how, you know, what the experience will be like for a broad range of people. Like I said, we serve a broad range of communities, and we have to be thinking about these things all the time at the forefront. And so that was one of the things that we shifted and has been really successful. And our tours engagement has been really successful during that time, just to keep people in conversation and feeling connected. And another thing we were able to do in terms of supporting our community was kind of like offering the platforms we had to share their work. So, you know, really thinking about the groups you were speaking of who, you know, were most targeted in terms of, you know, injustice and racial attacks during this time. Thinking about ways that their work and their message could be shared. And so, you know, using all of our social media platforms and, you know, whatever projects we're working on, helping to get their work out there. And we started doing social media takeovers and, you know, having people just like, you know, have that space in our audience to speak to for the day and share what they wanted to. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many things that we've been reconsidering. And the other thing that's happened for the gallery is we have a lot of new staff in leadership roles and in different positions. And so we've been in a huge time of transition. And so I feel that the way we're approaching things is in a time of flux and transition. And it's really exciting because There's those of us who have been here for a while and we have a sense of certain things and are trying to bring in new ideas and approaches. But when you have completely fresh eyes come into an institution, that can bring, you know, lots of new energy. So I'm excited to see how things shift there. Yeah, let's leave it there.
Okay, so I'm hearing you're saying that this pandemic experience gave you several new approaches. I mean, it gave you new audiences, maybe from local to international, from places you didn't expect before. It gave you new collaborations with local actors. The value of the space became more visible, and value of connections, and maybe also technology suddenly, you know, has this opens up this new possibilities. And you rethought your activities, your, you know, daily practices from a different perspective to be able to meet the needs of new audiences or new community members you're now noticing. Maybe, I mean, I don't know, do you have any questions for each other? I mean, I know that you have similar experiences, different communities, but I was really excited when I heard each of you in our earlier conversations, you know, you were accentuating things. I thought, oh, wow, they really have similar, you know, concerns, and they have tried similar things. Also other museums and cultural centers, I listened, but I just want to ask you if you have any questions for each other first.
I would be curious just to hear about, as I mentioned, there's so much enthusiasm for getting back into programming, in-person programming. I'm just curious how, you know, I think we can all agree that things don't feel, even though we're jumping back into things, they don't feel normal, whatever that means. Like, I think we've gotten used to living in a pandemic and living with this thing hovering, and we're still pushing through, but it's like this, you know, a draining program running in the background all the time. And then it feels like we're jumping back in and there's still so much happening. And one of the things we're in conversation about here is, you know, how do we manage this shift and the volume of what we're trying to do when, like, no one's running at 100% right now, but we're what's needed of us is 100 plus, right? And so if any wise words about how you might be trying to manage that right now?
I don't have any wise words. I have a really great business manager, and he recently hired a grants coordinator for me. So I now have help writing grants. Oh my God. It's amazing. So that has actually freed up a lot of my time just to kind of reconnect with my staff, I feel like, and check in with them and how they're doing. And it feels like my stress level has just gone down because I mean, the BC Arts grant that just went in was insane. And so it's nice to share that burden. I didn't lose any hair or so it was a different experience this year. This was my first 2-year grant with BC Arts, so I was a little bit freaked. But I think, yeah, just having that extra support and having the ability to check in with everyone has been, we find that still really important. And we have gone back to programming in person, but we're noticing a bit of a drop in attendance. So I think it's people's comfort level as well. And we've looked at different ways. So maybe we do weaving outside on our picnic tables if it's nice, that kind of thing. So we're still trying to tweak to find sort of the comfort level for everyone. And people have different comfort levels. People have different health challenges still. So I know our shop staff all were wearing masks still, just to and we've left it up to visitors whether they want to. So it's still a pivoting, changing game, right? Yeah.
There's still a fear, I
Mhm.
guess, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like, it seems like everything is open and okay, but then, there's always that, oh, what if?
Mhm.
So, yeah. And Karah, you
Sounds
wanted
like,
to say something?
yeah, I was just thinking, that sounds like a great hire, Juanita. That's, wow. I think we can all agree that would be great.
Yeah,
So
I didn't even think of it. It was my business manager, Joseph, and thank God for Joseph. Like, what? That's genius. We can do that. So we did. Yeah, it's great.
I think for
Okay,
us,
well,
just
oh no, so sorry, I
No,
didn't hear you
I'm
going. Go
just
ahead.
gonna just kind of say, for us, something that we've been doing is, or we've endeavored in, is new strategic planning with the board. So still engaging the board in our society. And what has really emerged is the need to address our business model and really take a good look at, we've been established for just over 20 years. We started one way, where are we going for the next 20 years on sort of a larger scale, but really looking at some of the opportunities that we identified through the shifts that were needed and the gaps that were identified. So new revenue generating activities, what within our footprint and within our scope of who we are and what we do, there are some potential opportunities, and so that's something that that brings some excitement and some hope for the future. Yeah, at this time.
Yeah, I think that kind of points to the kind of shifts that are not only happening in the practices, but also at the structural, organizational level, the way the work is organized, the way you operate. That seems to kind of the pandemic experience seems to have an impact at several levels in organizations. From what you say, that's what I understand, Karah. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for this insightful discussion. I would like to now turn to our audience for questions and comments. And Amara, what's the best way to ask questions for the audience?
Yeah, so if you're in the audience and you want to ask a question verbally, feel welcome to use the button at the very bottom of your screen. It says reactions. If you click on that and there's that raise hand feature, you can raise your hand and then I will give you permission to unmute, because we are recording today's session. So all the microphones outside of the speakers are muted, but just raise your hand, I'll unmute you. Or if you don't want to ask a question verbally, feel welcome to pop your question in the chat. I have a question, actually, and you may have already talked about it, but a question I have is, have any of you had a member of your community come up to you and just express a lot of gratitude over what you've done and how much you've helped them over these past few years? And has any of that really stuck with you?
Yeah, I'll maybe just go back to the Holding Ground exhibition and the Indigenous Intergenerational exchange that happened. I was really like kind of just the internal, logistics person, and that was really led by Marianne and Nikki and Marika and the group. What the feedback we got from the folks who participated and what was created through that program was really a testament to the work and the thoughtfulness that those three facilitators put into really deeply considering what they wanted to offer and invite people into, and the kind of adaptability that happened once it started to just be responding to what people really needed at that time. And so you know, what we were hearing from folks during that. And then we put up the exhibition, and it was such a great time because we all actually got to be in space together. And Marianne designed a design for a dance curtain that was painted by the group collectively. So we were all together to do that finally in person. And then we had a closing meal together in October when the show came down. And it was in those moments that people were able to share like how much it meant, how they were sad that the meetings finished, and they kind of missed having those bi-weekly visits. And like I said, that whole program and that whole project just left such a huge impression on me about what it means when you take time to do things with such deep consideration and intention, that it makes such a difference. So that was really beautiful to hear the impact that had on folks. So yeah. I see Chris has a question, Chris O'Connor from the museum.
Yeah.
About community. That's a really good question, Chris.
Yeah, so I'll just read that. Hi, Chris. Thanks everyone on the panel for the discussion. I've really appreciated the focus on care, both internally, staff, and externally, larger community. My only lingering question is, when you each use the word community, what does that mean to you? And how has your organizational understanding of community shifted over the last few years? Yeah, great question.
I'll kind of jump in here. Initially the word community for us has meant a very broad meaning, and more traditionally within our organizations, certainly. Meaning really often referring to anyone of Japanese, Canadian ancestry, Japanese ancestry, or local to living within proximity of the local area that we're within, and those participating in our activities. So any of the activities, whatever they are, whether they're anything from seniors to kids programs, health and fitness programs that take place on a weekly basis, language, arts and culture, attending exhibitions, researchers coming to use our resource center, and those could be students or academics, family members, individuals who are doing family research within our repository and archives. And so we started, there's very broad definition of what community meant to us. And we started to hone in on specifically who was participating actively, the people in close proximity, those who have been engaging and attending these programs, but understanding that widely and across the country, there are people of Japanese ancestry, which we also serve, that wouldn't be as close to us. But it's very broad because that's people whose common connection is ancestry, and that's not necessarily going to connect them across similar ideas or perspectives. We're very diverse. So when we say a diverse community, we're really talking about people of Japanese ancestry, it may be. And so that people have a wide range of perspectives and life experience, and they approach things in a really varied way. And so we started to at least focus our attention at this critical time around active volunteerism and volunteers, to really focus our attention on those who were supporting us and helping to either provide programs and engage with us, or the artists and collaborators that we work with. So maybe that doesn't quite fully answer or define for Chris, or narrow it down, but it can be this sort of wide, broad range of people that we do serve. And at the time, especially in sort of mid 2020, we just needed to really focus on, who is actively here, who's actively engaging with us, because again, we knew that we couldn't spread ourselves too thin and do everything that perhaps came up as ideas, and we had to narrow that focus a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Karah. Thank you, Chris, for your question. Does anyone else want to answer this question?
I think for our community, it was also really broad. We're here in our mandate, we represent all Kwakwaka'wakw, so that's a large territory. But of course, not everyone comes to the center. Not everyone knows that. So we also made the shift a few years ago to start thinking about our community as our next door neighbors. So the extended care patients at the hospital, the treatment center patients. And then through the pandemic, it has shifted to those organizations in the community that have now become part of our partnerships, our working group, and our community as well. And of course, it always included elders that we hire to speak the language, or artists who we purchase merchandise from. So it's still quite broad, but I think it's even encompassed more people, even just from a keeping everyone safe in the community aspect. And our island is comprised of Numgis First Nation Reserve and the Wilalaiu Area Council Society. So it's a smaller reserve with outlying people from outlying villages that have houses here, and then the actual village of Alert Bay as well. And so by working together, we've all come to realize that we're in this together as well. And so it strengthened those partnerships a lot, and we're getting a lot more done for the community as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Juanita. And I guess, Nicole, you have a different maybe definition of community compared to Umista and the Nikkei Cultural Center, right?
Yeah, I mean, ours is really broad as well, and maybe I would say communities, just to make it clear that there's distinct groups and communities that we are wanting to connect with and engage with and have been building relationships with. And maybe there's different words, my colleague Jen Vanderpool often refers to folks we engage with as our co-learners, and also think about, collaborators as a way to describe, because so much of what we do is really in conversation with and in collaboration with the community. But I feel like this could be a whole panel discussion just on how we define community. So maybe that's something for the RBCM to do, Chris, a conversation on what does it mean what do we define community? But yeah, that's a really a great conversation to be having and to be thinking about, because in all of our grants, as Juanita was just describing, we had a big grant week recently, and we have to define things for our funders in clear ways that we can communicate. Yeah, so it's a big question for sure. Oh, I see Chris is putting that in his work plan.
Yeah,
awesome.
Great. Thanks, Chris. All right. Any other questions or comments from our speakers or from our audience?
I might even just jump in again on this community topic,
Sure.
just around, I think it's interesting because we are using this word community so often, and so so frequently we use community, and it's almost just becoming this term that we utilize to refer to a number of different people, groups, stakeholders, whoever we're kind of engaging with. So I do think that's a really interesting and larger discussion, because it is kind of a question I have often been asking when asked about, what if we're asked about, say, a very general question, what does the Japanese Canadian community think of XYZ? Well, we're a very diverse, not even a group of people necessarily. This is, you know, it's certainly complex and just as many perspectives as there are individuals. And so I think we are starting to see the use of this word terminology in a way that maybe becomes a little bit more confusing or broad. Sometimes it clarifies certain things, but we're sort of using this word in a different way today than in the past, and it'll be interesting to see how that also progresses.
That's right. And then we also talk about representing the community memories, representing the community history. And so if people relate to the place and to, you know, to the place actually in different ways, right? I think in our conversations, Karah, we talked about this, like Japanese community in Canada have different experiences, different generations, and their stories are different. And so which one of that are you representing? Which ones are you like all inclusive, or, you know, it's a difficult job. So that I think brings the diversity of community, that word community, into our attention. Yeah. Yes, it opens up the Pandora's box. So maybe a sequel to our talk of today. Well, I think our time is almost up, so I'd like to thank to our speakers today. I also would like to thank to many other people who shared their experiences with me in the past year from different cultural organizations. I'll just name them here. So Mista Cultural Center, Squamish and Lillooet Cultural Center, Kamloops Museum and Archives, Museum of North Vancouver, Museum of Vancouver, Jewish Museum and Archives, Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center, Museum of New Westminster, of Surrey, Richmond Museum, Nanaimo Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, and Chinese Canadian Museum in Vancouver. I had the pleasure to visit some of these places, and I had the pleasure to meet some cultural workers and talk with them about similar issues that we kind of discussed today. I'd like also to thank you to Royal Roads University for supporting this research, and to my colleague Mara Angus for hosting this webinar. Thank you to everyone who joined us today to listen to our discussion. Thank you to Juanita, Karah, and Nicole for being here. And please reach out if you have questions or suggestions. I'll put my email here in the chat. And thank you for joining us today, and have a great weekend.